many ways to test your React components and also many tools that can help you. One of the most capable one is a React testing library. So the way it works is that it avoids including any implementation details of your component, and it focuses on making your tests give you the confidence in a way that they are intended. So you want your test space to be maintainable in the long run. So the refactoring of your component and changes that can be coming later, which are not related to its functionality, will not break your test and slow you and your team down as well. So you'll face these issues as you are big part of a big project and big teams, and definitely when you build your components first time and you write your test and you come later, you or someone else, and you want to do the changes, you don't want that to block you. You want to be confident enough that the test will help you out and tell you what is broken and what is not, and what is really important and how you can fix those. So the way it works is that it renders your components in a DOM node in a simulated browser environment, and then it makes assertions against that DOM node. It's like if you render your component in actual browser, but it's not really a real browser, it's just simulated browser environment. And that's render, when you render your component, it gives you few returns. So it returns you a container, which is your render, and some queries function that can help you access your container and make your assertions against them. And we'll see this through our documentations later. So just remember that the React testing library is not a test runner specific to a testing framework. However, in their documentation, it's really highly recommended to do it or use it in combination with Jest. And one more thing we need to remember before we jump on our demo, doing too much is not good and does not prove that you are a good programmer. Actually, it can create issues for you down the road. Whenever your components get more complex and more changes comes in, so test what you need to test. Whatever you think is important in your component, test it. Testing too much is not great, but does not mean that don't test your components as well. So just test what is important, and definitely this may look strange at the beginning, but after a few practices you will know how to approach your component and how to test it in very good balance. To our React testing library documentation, if we go for example to the example section, so we'll see an example here which is a bit complex, but just for you to have a basic idea, then we'll start doing our own building our own tests, and we will start very small. So here what they are trying to test here, it's just a component which is a fetch component and having a URL that you are passing here as a string, right? So he's saying the test is about loads and display greeting. Okay, so here they're doing async testing, so they are finding some button in there which have a text load greeting. Okay, so here you're simulating the click. You're getting user event from the testing library / user event. Then you are triggering the click function. But on where you're triggering that click? On a text called load greeting. And then you're waiting until this happens. And then you say, okay, I want you to find an element for me, but by a role. And that role is heading. Okay, so we are doing all that stuff, we are clicking, we are finding. Now it's our assertions where actual test is going, what we want to test. So I want to say they're testing here in my screen, which we said before. Remember, we render the function. That is your screen, which is coming from testing React library, and that's you can access after you run the render command. So it's saying screen, get an element for me by role heading, and I want that heading check for me that have a text content hello there. So in my heading, I want to make sure I have this text in my heading. Then in my screen or my DOM render, I want to check by role, do we have any element with role button? And I want that button to be disabled. So basically that's what test does for you here. So as you can see here, that's the queries we're talking about in our slide, and that's your container. So these queries are many queries, and it may look overwhelming with so many queries that you have to remember. I was like that first time. I was like, how I remember all this? But trust me, after a few tests, it will just be coming by default and you'll just remember all of them. One trick I did is that they have a sheet here. So if I go to the sheet and I go and get printable, you download a sheet file and I'll just open it. And here you have a nice, beautiful sheet. What I did, I just printed and keep it in front of me. And after a few days, I didn't need it really. So here how you render your component, how you can search in the DOM, like here they're getting by role, and also how you interact with the elements, like we said the click event. You can also have type event. Then you have your screen, search variants like get by, so you can get by, get all by, query all by, and these ones can here have, for example, get by text, get all by text, and so on. And also here you have search types, so you can search by role, by label text, by placeholder text, by display value, and so on. And here you have text match and so on. So it's really pretty simple, it's really easy, and it's much more easier than when you look at it first time. So now let's go back to our demo. Let's create a simple component. I'll just create here a component folder, and I will create a button, for example, and inside that button I'll create index.js, which will hold my own component, and I'll call it button. And let's say this button we want two versions. One is a text button and another one is an icon button, for example. So we have two versions, and that will come from the props, right? So let's say the default one should be text, and if we pass a property which called icon, then we don't have a text here, but we have an icon. Okay, so what I will do, I'll say if icon exists, then I want to have an image tag, for example, and otherwise I want to have a text button, for example. Good. Okay, so I'll just pick up some image from somewhere. Now I'll import my button from here, and I'll just remove everything here because I don't need it at the moment, which means if you remember one test will fail. And I'll say I have button, so I have default one, and to be self-closing at the moment, and I want another button that comes with icon, which is a boolean at the moment. Okay, and we'll just come here npm run start, and that should run it from in my local host. So here's where I'll give it a div and make it a button, and closing also should be a button. Okay, now let's save, go back to my browser, and there we go. So as you can see, now we have two buttons. One is coming with the text and one is coming with an icon. It doesn't look pretty, but yeah, for us now we just want to learn how we can test it. So let's go back to our code. Now we want to create a test file, so I'll come here and add a file. I'll call it index.test.js, and as you remember in here, we just have to import these things first, and I'll copy and paste that, and I'll import my button. So here what I have done is I added a nested description, and the reason is why it will help me here in my terminal when I run my test to make it more readable. So for example here in my button, if I go back to my component, I want to do few tests in two scenarios. The first scenario is when my icon is passed, and second scenario when my icon is not passed. Okay, so when my icon passed, I want to make sure that the image is not there. And I want to make sure, of course, I have a button, and I want to make sure that I have a button text in there. Okay, the second scenario, so you see in the first scenario already we have three tests. In the second scenario, when I pass the icon, So I want to do, of course, the first test that my button element is there. The second test, I want to make sure that an image element is there. And the third test, I want to make sure that my button text is not there. Nice, right? So to make this more readable, there are a few things you can do here. You can have some nested description. So for example, say here, when icon prop not passed, okay, of course I want to render my button, and I'm saying I'm creating here my DOM, my button element DOM. I'm rendering it, then I'm accessing it by my container, which is screen that we imported from React testing library. And I'm saying, okay, I'm expecting that you go to my screen and get for me by role button. So I want an element which have button role, and I want that to be in document. I want to have that exist. Okay, and as you can see here, it's already passed, but we have one failing test, which I think few of you may already know why. It's coming from the app test. So here we remove all the content to put the buttons there. So of course this learn text doesn't exist. So there are a few things we can fix here. We know this no render text. I know this render button now. So I say, for example, renders. I have two buttons. Or let's say button. And I want to go here and I'll say the button element, for example, and I'll say here get by role, and I'll say the role is button, and I want that to be in my document. And let's see how our test will run now. So good. So this one's still failing, and the reason is, if we read it, is all by. Okay, so reason is because we have more than one button, so the test is failing. So it doesn't find multiple elements with the role button. So that's one more thing. Make sure always you read the errors. It's really helpful. Just sometimes it points you directly to the problem. Here are the matching elements. So there are two. There is one with button text and there is one with image. So to give you the full print of your actual DOM element.
So in the React testing library, there is another query we can use, which is called get by test ID. And the way it works is that you add an ID to your element, and then you find it in here by this query. However, the test ID is a bit different than normal ID used in HTML, so you can't access it through your actual HTML, but only through your test in the React library. So the way we can do that, we go to app, we pass an attribute in here which is called data test ID, so you can pass it down here and then pass it through. And we give it this value, you can give it any ID you want. And then I go here, I pass that one, and I pass it in here. So that's your attribute your element should have. Okay, so if I save this and run my test, that should pass. Okay, now let's go back to our actual test. So let's close app. So going back here, so this is our first scenario, as we said before. So when the pop is not passed, first we confirm that we have a button. The second thing we need to do is that we need to make sure we don't have an image. So the way you can do an image is that you can't get a role by image because the image doesn't have a role actually. So we can find it by get by alt text. Okay, and let's say my icon, for example, my icon. I'll save it and I'll just go to my HTML here, and here I'll just give an alt. I'll call it my icon, and I want this. The message will be should not render image. So this one should not be in the DOM actually. So not, then dot to be in document. So it should not be in document. I'll run it and let's see what my tests do. So it failed, and the reason why, unable to find an element. So that's not the thing you will learn here now. So when you are trying to find an element which really does not exist, you don't say get, but you say query. Okay, save, and that should work. Nice, so all my tests passed. So the next test should be testing that the text exists. Okay, should render text. For example, this is my text currently. So I'll say here screen get element get by text, and this is my text, and I want that to be available in the DOM. Click save, and let's run it. Nice. Okay, so we finished the first test for the first scenario, which is when the icon pop is not passed. The next one is we want to test when the icon is passed. So when icon pop is passed, I want, of course, to always render the button. I want to render the image, and here I should pass the property icon, and here also I should pass property icon because we're testing the case when the property is passed. And I want my image to be in the DOM, and also I want here should not render text button, and here of course I have to pass it icon, that's the case we're testing, and here I don't want it to be in the document. I click save, and that should work. So it failed, and as we said before again, because we're trying to find something that doesn't exist, we should not say get, we have to say query. And you'll notice here also we are using query by text if it exists. So query works in both scenarios, but get don't work in the scenario when the element does not exist. So we just run our test again, and it